Hello and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Today, we want to talk about Armenia's domestic political and economic situation as the fall season settles in. So we have with us Mr. Arthur Khachatryan, who is a member of the parliament from the opposition Hayastan Dashinq alliance, and also a member of the ARF Dashnaq. He is also an economist by profession. Hello, Mr. Khachatryan. Thanks for coming on the show.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for inviting me.
Ողջույն. Mr. Khachatryan, let's start by taking a broad look at Pashinyan and the civil contract's time in power, which encompasses the loss in the 44-day war, an economy that seems to be growing but is mostly due to re-exports, so it's not felt very widely, territorial alliances, their view on the church, education. I mean, this is very broad, and we can go into any of these in more detail. You know, as a member of the ARF, as a member of the opposition, how do you and how does your party, how does your alliance view this government's records in these areas? Specifically, maybe we can start with the negotiation process with Azerbaijan. How do you feel that is going right now?
Well, to start with, I don't think there is any negotiation process going on. Negotiation is a dialogue. Okay? The two parties come together. They have a dialogue. They have a conversation on a certain issue or a range of issues. What we see just a monologue. Azerbaijan instructs, orders, and Pashinyan obeys. So there is no dialogue. There is no negotiation. Okay, just two examples. Azerbaijan ordered Pashinyan to change the constitution. To accommodate the order, to implement that, Pashinyan comes to Armenia and says, you know, we used to live in historic Armenian, in brackets, in a mythical Armenian, unrealistic Armenia. Now we have to move to realistic Armenia, and we have to change our constitution to match with real Armenia. Okay, this is the way he tries to package the request that comes from Azerbaijan and to sell it to Armenian population. Other than that, okay, Azerbaijan says we need to eliminate the OSCE MG group. Armenia and Azerbaijan have to come together and jointly appeal to OSCE, dismantle this group. Okay, this is Azerbaijan's request. What Pashinyan does, he comes to the National Assembly and he says, what is the Minsk group? Okay, so he tries to discredit the Minsk group, to open the Overton window, and at the end of the day, to go and to apply to OSCE to eliminate the Minsk group, saying that the mediators were useless and they couldn't mediate the solution of the conflict. Okay, so this is the entree. Okay, there is no negotiation. It's a one-way ordering. Now let's compare what we have at the starting point and where are we right now. The last version of the settlement of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was proposed by the co-chairs in January 2018, the so-called Krakow draft. Pashinyan himself declassified this document in January 2020 in Kapa, which basically says, yes, Armenia swaps territories that were under the control of Armenian party. 5 of them, in return, Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, gets the right to decide on its own destiny, gets the right to hold a referendum or a plebiscite or expression of will, binding expression of will. Agenda is not limited. Okay, so Nagorno-Karabakh is getting the right to define its legal status by a legally binding referendum. What we have today, we do not have Nagorno-Karabakh. Tomorrow is the first anniversary of Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a sort type of genocide, and annexation of Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Okay, we lost a 44-day war. Pashinyan signed a trilateral statement with Putin and Aliyev. We thought that was the end. Nothing could be worse. But what happened about 2 weeks after this document? Azerbaijan launched attack in Khatsabert in South Nagorno-Karabakh in Hadrut district. And Armenia for the first time during the whole conflict, 35 years, didn't interfere. And as Armenia sent a signal to Azerbaijan that you can do anything you want. And Pashinyan's government major tactics is we are not guilty, everyone else is guilty. So when people ask what you are going to do, he said, well, the Russian peacekeepers are there. The peacekeepers are there to keep the peace. The peacekeepers are supposed to be neutral. Look, there are UN peacekeepers on the border between Lebanon and Israel. Okay. But this doesn't mean that Lebanon has delegated the mission of defending Lebanese territory to UN. Lebanon is still in charge of protecting its own territory. So Pashinyan tried to transform a mediator to a part of a conflict.
Right.
What we have next, okay, there is a word. Okay, what we have next? We have Azeris offensive against Republic of Armenia in May 2021. There is a saying, shield surrendered is a sword invited. Pashinyan followed Levanter Petrosian's logic, saying that you can't live well until the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh is resolved. And he even that debilitated even further, saying that by surrendering Nagorno-Karabakh, we bring protection to Armenia. Okay, and we saw what happened after Azerbaijan took control of the largest part of Nagorno-Karabakh, actually. From 12,000, they left about 2,500 square kilometers. Offensives in Georgia, in Black Lake, Sevlij, and in 2022, we have offensive in Jermuk. Today, Azerbaijan controls about 250 square kilometers of sovereign Armenian territory. And today, literally today, Pashinyan again said that we are not even talking about liberating this territory by force. And he's preparing the population to that. He said, Azeris say, you were torturing us for 30 years by having our lands occupied. So be ready for a reciprocal action from Azerbaijan. He prepares the nation to live with Azeris on our territory. And what we have today, Azerbaijan controls the major road from Yerevan down to south to Sunik and then further to Iran. Because Azeris came, they show the GPS, they say according to GPS, this road belongs to us. And Pashinyan surrendered this land to Azerbaijan. What happened in April, May in Kirans up in north? Again, they passed the land to Azerbaijan. I asked publicly at the National Assembly, based on what documents, measurements, maps, you pass this territory to Azerbaijan? What's the area of the land that you pass to Azerbaijan? The speaker and the vice speaker told me, okay, if you want to know the answer, send a written request to the government. I sent a written request to the government. I got the answer in a closed envelope. Basically, this means I cannot say what was there. But the fact that the government sends the information about surrendered territories in a sealed envelope means they are hiding that from the public. So this is what we have.
Is this something you cannot discover inside the parliament? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that in the government, in the parliament, you ask a question and they give you a bureaucratic runaround to say, apply through the following channels.
Well, they said, okay, if you want to know the numbers, apply. Okay, ask for information from the government. I send a written request, which is within my competence. Okay, I have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the answer in a sealed envelope. This means that the government is keeping it secret how much territory that used to be under Armenia's sovereign jurisdiction has been passed on to Azerbaijan.
Mr. Khachatryan, I mentioned a lot of potential areas to cover, and we have not. But what you're saying so far is very dire. It's convincing to me, at least, that not everything that could be done right is being
Is being
done.
done.
Yes, but I wanted to ask you, perhaps, with everything that you have said so far, and we haven't even covered the diaspora relations, we haven't covered anything. Why isn't the opposition more successful? And how can the opposition turn the table on the government's failures more, if we look at it more proactively? We know that the opposition has been at the forefront in trying to bring up these issues, but I don't know, how would you assess even the results that we have so far?
Well, since Pashinyan is still in prime minister's chair, this means that we were not quite successful. Okay, so I cannot maneuver on that. Okay. First, there were over expectations from the opposition. The proportion of it's more than 1 to 2 at the parliament. So the public generally was expecting us that we can overthrow them using by means of the street, using public protests. Pashinyan is very, they have a very strong propaganda apparatus. Okay, they can brainwash. They manage to brainwash a large proportion of population, saying that, okay, I'm here to establish peace. But we see that he was talking about peace, but he brought war to Nagorno-Karabakh and to Armenia. Besides, he has police forces. If you walk on the streets of Yerevan, around National Assembly during the sessions, at the Republic Square, you will see dozens of policemen, police officers, riot police, different special units. They're paid more than the military, than that the officers and privates that are on the borders. Okay. He hasn't had any military exercise for years. I'm talking about real military exercises. But this summer they had Eagle partner with the US. And when you read the description of this Eagle partner military exercise, you see crowd control. Crowd control is not military. Crowd control is police. Then he has this tax, the Internal Revenue Service, let me say it this way, and we call it tax terror. Okay, when any businessman says something, the next day they receive an inspection from tax office. And it's not that business, okay? His parents, his siblings, his spouse, children. So they're under very heavy pressure. And we see a remarkable demonstration of double standards, especially from the West. And a few weeks ago, Borrell himself confessed that it's an era of double standards. Okay, all together, all these factors combined keeps Pashinyan still in power. But if you look at the polls, at the public opinion surveys, only 1 in 7 is still says that they will vote for Pashinyan. The combined opposition, the united opposition, all the opposition parties together, they are nearly the same as Pashinyan. If we take into account that during the polls, people usually are more afraid to criticize the government than to defend them, then I have a gut feeling that his opponents are more than his proponents. Plus, we have a big number of people who say we don't care. Which basically, if the largest part of the population says we don't care, we won't go to polling station, means that he has managed to crash political system, political institutes. But again, okay, I want to repeat it. Since he's still in power, this means we were not quite successful.
So, Arthur, I have a question about the economic performance under this government. It has reported approximately 10% economic growth rate and a rate of inflation of 2.8% for the first half of 2024. But when you ask Armenian people on the street, they're not feeling this so-called good economy in their pocketbooks or in their lives. Can you talk a little bit about this discrepancy, this disconnect between the reported good economy and the common citizen's experience?
Well, very, very good question, actually, because there is growth and there is a quality, number of growth or quantity of growth, and then quality of growth. Look what attributes to economic growth in this country. Okay, the re-export. Armenia's top trade partner is United Arab Emirates. In 2022, we've exported about $70 million to United Arab Emirates. In 2023, $2.24 billion. Question, what on earth we are exporting to United Arab Emirates? It's gold, okay? Raw gold and jewelry. Basically, this means we import gold from Russia, re-export it to Arab Emirates, and then it goes from Emirates to Hong Kong. I think that's what the jewelers say. Okay,
Just
but
to be
basically,
clear, doesn't Armenia have enough supplies of its own gold, or is this re-export? Is it confirmed to be re-export of Russian gold?
look, if we compare the data for 23 with data from 2019, the export of raw gold has increased, I think, fivefold. In 2019, the Sotk gold mine was operating. The largest gold mine was operating. Today, it operates at a small percentage of its capacity because it's on the border with Azerbaijan, and Azeris just do not allow the mine to operate. The Amulsar Goldmine hasn't started operations yet. So the question, where from we have fivefold increase in raw gold exports? Other than that, the manufacturing of jewelry items in 2023 compared to 2022 has increased 23.6 times. Okay, 23.6 times, or 26.3. Okay, but let's take the smaller numbers. Can you imagine a branch of an industry that increased in a year more than 23 times?
It seems to me like there would need to be entire new cities full of jewelry factories in order for this to happen. Of
Very
course.
true. Very true. Okay, this means the gold comes from Russia. They changed the label on it, re-export it to United Arab Emirates. This is basically what is a major driver in brackets of Armenia's economic growth.
Do these re-exports contribute to the tax revenue base?
Very little. Very little. Okay.
So there's almost no benefit to the country from these
That's very
re-exports.
true. That's very true. That is why we don't see any spillover. We don't see economic growth transforming to well-being of the general public. Okay, the other items, okay, if you have a look at that, okay, other major items on our export and import list. Cars. We do not manufacture cars. Household electronics, household equipment like washing machines, dishwashers, TVs, refrigerators, we do not manufacture. Since Russia is under sanctions, okay, we import mobile phones, cell phones in American English, okay, we do not manufacture cell phones. And a company that's just a shop, well, a chain of stores selling mobile phones is on the list of 10 largest taxpayers. That's because of the sanctions against Russia. Okay, Armenia imports mobile phones, exports it to Russia. Import cars, export to Russia. Other thing, Russian banks were cut from SWIFT. So the Russians would send their money using other money transfer systems to Armenia and then send it to West. The other thing, the highly paid professionals from Russia, mainly in IT industry. Now we see decrease in money transfers because lots of Russians, high qualified, highly paid professionals have left the country to Georgia, Emirates, Turkey, Thailand. Okay, Turkey, Emirates, Thailand, I understand. But we lost them to Georgia. The money transfers have gone down in absolute terms and in net terms. Tourists decreased. Import, export, okay?
Arthur, this was one of the questions we were going to ask you. So, in fact, the remittances have decreased by 48%. But I was also going to ask you about the IT industry, which is kind of a darling of this government, right? It gets subsidies and everything, but it has apparently gone down 13%. What is this all about?
Because the initial growth was attributed to the Russian programmers who came to Armenia. Now they've left. According to industry professionals, more than 75% have gone. A few weeks ago, we had budget execution report from the first half for the first half of 2024, and the government admits that they have gone. The tourism industry, another darling of this government, has decreased. That's why we see the external positive factors are diminishing. The positive influence on Armenian economy is diminished. Look at the yield curve. If you look at the yield curve, the market expects stagnation. The central bank has decreased the refinancing rate. The harder rate, this means, okay, they see that the market is going down, they want to throw more cash to the market. Okay. But, okay, if you can return back to your initial question, the numbers, the economy growth numbers are not translated into a real increase of welfare of the public because the growth can be attributed only to re-import or export. And according to the government, to the Minister of Finance, if we take gold from imports and exports, the imports have gone down, the exports have gone down. With gold, the imports have increased by 80%, exports have increased 2.3 times. Without gold, we see decrease. So you see all the growth in brackets, so-called growth, can be attributed to gold only. And to hide that in the statistic, they've included gold, precious metal, in the category of base metals. By definition, precious metals, gold, is not a base metal. But since they've seen that there were lots of, that people have basically found out what's going on, they try to hide that in base metals.
Arthur, one final question in the economy. The government has come under a lot of criticism for poor planning of its capital and operational expenditures and also the revenues. There are large discrepancies, which the finance minister has tried to explain. But regardless, what is the reason why the government is not hitting its marks in projected revenues and expenditures?
You are following the government's session today because they were discussing the draft budget.
I was not, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, basically they're underperforming on capital expenditures. They are underperforming on current expenses too. But if the delivery rate for current expenses is like high 90s, then capital expenditures is about 70%. Okay, so this government is underperforming on its capital expenditures chronically. If you underperform on your capital expenditures, on your capital investments, you cannot have economic growth. And we have to look also what kind of capital expenditures government talking about. Like they are repaving the central streets of Yerevan. They have done that 2 years ago. They are doing this today. The contribution to economic growth, miserable. Okay. They paved that very poorly. The quality of the construction was very, very bad. And now they are fixing that again. Does this contribute to economy? From mathematical economics, yes, because people get salaries. Okay, you buy raw materials to repair the roads, but it doesn't create new opportunities to the country. Second, okay, yeah, because they miscalculated the drop in external positive factor. That's why they missed their revenue targets, their tax revenue targets. Not tax, all revenue targets.
Right.
But it's another interesting thing, okay? In 2018, Pashinyan used to say Armenians were not meant to be fined. And if you look at the growth items, you will see that the fines were increased by 20%. And it's a big number. Okay, they keep fining people.
Do you know what category in these fines are? Is it traffic fines or are there other fines that the government is imposing?
And I
Okay.
think traffic fines first. During the last session at the National Assembly, they increased the fines for overdue taxes. So basically, they try to fine, illegal construction, let me say this way. So they try to milk as much as possible from the public. Looking Yerevan, okay, they increased the parking fees 13 times from 12,000 drams to 160,000 drams in downtown Yerevan. The parking situation hasn't improved. It's as worse as it was 1 year ago. So the question, why are they collecting money? And it was in the press a few days ago that the Yerevan municipality was planning to spend 660 million drams to buy 30 electric cars for the municipality. Okay, so they are milking the public to buy cars for themselves.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was an eye-catching piece of news that I read. I mean, did they not have cars before?
Oh yeah,
Were
but
they walking to work?
okay, they prefer driving fancy cars. Okay, the government, I think the number for the government was over $2.2 billion drums.
Right.
Okay, this means they collect taxes and what they are spending on cars, foreign trips, fancy offices, bonuses. Why the government's getting bonus when they have missed their revenue targets, capital expenditure targets? The situation with in the negotiations, with this peace negotiations getting worse and worse. Why? Okay, they're talking about peace treaty.
Yeah.
Pashinyan understands that there's a true risk that after COP29, Azerbaijan may launch another offensive. So he basically begs to sign a preliminary peace treaty, which is basically crazy. Okay, he says we've agreed on 13 articles out of 17, so let's have a let's separate these 13 articles into another document, call it peace treaty, and sign it. It's funny.
So
It's miserably
this
funny.
Yeah, it's
it's
tragic.
funny. It's funny
It's
until
tragic.
it's funny until we come back to my previous question, which was why isn't the opposition more successful? But I think we can continue asking that question over and over and not get an answer, because it's very difficult. But let me actually, for the sake of content, because we have a lot of questions for you, I want to move forward and talk about Armenia's so-called pivot to the West. In an environment where the people are not feeling this booming economic growth that the government claims exists, and the prosperity supposedly that goes along with that, as the new electric vehicles for the city of Yerevan show, the US response to Pashinyan's pivot to the West is telling the people of Armenia, and I'm quoting, no, I'm not, but it's equivalent, let them eat democracy. Well, literally, the former US ambassador to OSCE, Dan Baer, said that Armenians must be prepared to endure some cold winters. In other words, let them eat democracy. How is Armenia's pivot to the West going, in your opinion, Mr. Khachatryan?
Well, first, talking about this pivot to the West, Armenian authorities keep saying that we are diversifying our economy, since we talked about economy a lot, okay, and creating closer ties with the West. The share of exports to European Union in the whole portfolio of Armenian exports for the first half of 2024 was 3.5% only. During the whole history of trade with European Union since Armenia regained independence in 1991, this is the smallest number. So Armenia's dependence on Russia has gone up. The
And in fact,
number,
my understanding is that it's not even in percentage terms. It's not that Armenia's dependence on Russia has gone up. I think in absolute terms, Armenia's exports to the US and to Germany, I believe, have gone down drastically. Is that correct?
these statistics, okay, doesn't even report the share of US in Armenian exports because it's such a small number. Okay, so they're talking about diversification, but the dependence on Russia has gone up. A few days ago, the Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Hovik was in Armenia. He had a very interesting interview saying that, okay, there is press, there is propaganda, and there is a real life. He basically saying that the ties with Russia are getting close. The Russians' involvement in the Armenian economy is much stronger. So don't trust too much to the press. Second, the French Prime Minister was in Armenia a few days ago. The moment he left, he was appointed as a commissioner to European Commission. And he says that France is ready to protect Armenia from Russia. Well, who's going to protect Armenia from Turkey and Azerbaijan? And we see how the West protected Georgia in 2008 in a war against Russia. We are for diversification. We are for complementary politics. Getting friends with West doesn't mean getting enemy with the Russians, though we understand that the relations between West and Russia are maybe the worst since 1920s, the intervention to Russia after the revolution. I'm talking about 100 years. But nevertheless, there are issues that bring Russia and the West together. One is the Turkish question, Turkey. Of course, neither Russia nor Iran, Europe, US, Arab world are happy with untamed increase of power of Turkey. And the same with Azerbaijan. But this government, Pashinyan's government, is gambling. And it's a very dangerous game. Ignoring realities can be very, very, very dangerous. What happened to Saakashvili? Of course, we are for
He
equal
ate his tie.
relations. And you know where's Saakashvili these days, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, we are for equal or dignified relations with the West, with the North, with the South. But you have to take into account the realities. Look at the situation with the so-called Mevri corridor. This problem was created because Pashinyan tried to gamble, tried to auction this corridor. Instead of taking the risk, taking the arrows away from Zangezur, from Sunik, from Mevri, he created this funny crossroads of peace project. Okay, because it's a project, but it's just slides, few slides. Okay, instead of requesting immediate and simultaneous opening of all roads, I mean, automobile roads and railroads, including the northern route, okay, Ijevan, Gazakh, Ganzak, and then either to north or to east. And the same Gyumri cars or the Mastara Bridge. He brought all the risk, all the, he concentrated on Mehri. And he started auctioning that. Now, Russians wants to control that. The West wants to control that. And Iran says, okay, why shouldn't I do that?
Right.
Armenia, during its whole history, has suffered the most when superpowers are fighting each other in Armenia. Okay, Romans and the Persians, Byzantines, Persians, Persian Turks, Russians, Persians, Russian Turks. He transferred Armenia into a battlefield between West and North. This was the most erroneous policy that someone can think of. Instead of trying to find common interests and to play a cooperative game, he started playing highly speculative, confronting game. This is, and the situation we have today is that today he confessed that there is no nation or security bloc that can guarantee Armenian security. Thus, he is preparing grounds for another round of unilateral concessions to Azerbaijan and to Turkey.
Arthur, what struck me really is that when Georgia made its own pivot to the West, regardless of how it ended up, the EU, the US, and their partners made heavy investments in Georgian economy, at least to boost. We're not talking about security and protection in the 2008 war. I mean, the investments to Georgia during that time frame were counted in the billions of dollars. Yet, despite Pashinyan's audacious moves to alienate Russia, besides like some words, the West isn't really doing much. And maybe I'm wrong, but a week ago, USAID announced a grandiose doubling of our aid to Armenia. But when you find out the actual amount, which is about 130 million, that doesn't seem too much to me when we're considering that Armenia's dependence
No, Hovik,
on Russia is in
let's
billions.
clarify that. It's not 130 million. It's not a check to Armenia. It's a ceiling. Okay, it's the maximum amount. So the maximum amount is 130 million, but at the end of the day, they might end up spending $3 million.
And the other
million.
question is, what is that money going to be spent for? And it seems to be more like promotion of democracy, NGOs and so forth. So that's the other question that's not being asked. Yeah, but essentially, will this difference in the ceiling of the US aid make a tangible difference to Armenia?
In 2022, Charles Michel, the European Commission, or Europe, European Union, earmarked 2.6 billion euros to Armenia. I don't know how much we have received so far and what's its net effect on economy, democracy, security on Armenia. In April, when they had this big Armenia EU-US summit in Brussels with Antony Blinken, Samantha Power, with Borrell, I think Ursula von der Leyen was there too. Europe pledged 270 million euros for Armenia for 5 years, 10 times less than initial earmark, initial ceiling. US pledged 60 million for 4 years, which is basically 15 million a year. This is peanuts. This is peanuts compared to trade with Russia. And you're absolutely right. Okay, we do not see any substantial government aid, or I mean increasing government aid. And we do not see private investors in Armenia. Look, a year ago or year and a half ago, in a very interesting circumstances, that Armenia's largest taxpayer, which was German Cronimat, has its shares in the largest Armenian enterprise in Zangezur Copper Molybdenum Combine to Armenia, to the government of Armenia, to Russians. And basically, now let me say this way, okay? In a very interesting circumstances, Russian company became the owner of the combine of the mine, which was owned by the Germans. And then the Russians passed quarter of their stocks to the government. Having seen this, how many Western investors will rush to invest in Armenia? We have a Lebanese company, okay, the garbage company.
Sanitech
Yeah.
or Sanitech?
Sanitech, yeah. And what happened? Okay, they kicked Sanitech out, and now in international arbitration, Sanitech has brought Armenia, the case against Armenia in international arbitration court. The same with the minority shareholder of Zangezur, because according to the law, when the majority shareholder wants to sell or get rid of its stocks, the initial offer shall be done to the minority shareholder, which was not the case. Having seen this, what are you expecting? Are you expecting more American or the US investors?
Yeah, there's no confidence
American
in
or
investing in
European.
Armenia. Absolutely. Also, if I recall, and I'm working from the top of my head because I don't have any information about this in front of me, that quarter of the Zangezur molybdenum plant that was passed over to the government went to the ANIF Foundation, right? Which of course was suddenly dissolved because it was a failing.
Yeah. This was another funny story. First, it was given to the staff of the prime minister. The staff of the prime minister is not meant to manage shares in a company. Okay, then later on it was given to ANIF, Armenian National Interest Funds, and ANIF a month or 2 months ago, announced of its bankruptcy. Okay, the
Right.
staff was getting multi-thousand-dollar salaries, very lucrative, cushy salaries for Armenia. And what happened? Everything was just a fiasco. ANIF became known for his project with Air Arabia to
Yes.
form a
Yes.
company called Fly Arna. 51% was, belonged to Armenian, to Armenian government, 49% to Air Arabia. Couple of flights and finita la comedia,
Right.
bankrupt. Okay, so who's gonna answer?
And we should say who is the head of ANIF at the time, which is and that name is Tigran Avinyan, the current mayor
Yeah, he
of
was the head
Yerevan.
of the board of directors. Yeah,
So if that fund has been dissolved right now, for example, as an example, who owns 12.5% of the molybdenum plant?
the government. Who exactly? No, the government owns. Who runs it or who manages? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the Ministry of Economy. Okay, maybe the State Property Management Agency. Logically, it's supposed to be State Property Management Agency.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to our final section, Mr. Khachatryan. This is about Georgia. On October 26, Georgia is going to hold parliamentary elections, and their ruling party, Georgian Dream, they've had these efforts to rid the country's domestic politics from foreign influence over the past year, and this has led to a very acute crisis between Georgia and the EU. And then the West has painted these elections as a pivot to the West or a pivot to the East. Can you say what's at stake in Georgia's elections for them and also for us?
I really don't know. I follow that, but I'm not an expert to comment on that. What I can say is that Pashinyan's aid was rejected entry to Georgia a few days ago. To start with, Pashinyan went to Georgia a few days ago. They made a joint statement with the Georgian Prime Minister. They talk about territorial integrity. Armenia has diplomatic relations with Georgia since independence. For the first time, they are talking about territorial integrity. Why this item appeared on their agenda, I have no idea. Third, what I really care is improvement of relations between Georgia and Russia. Why? Because if the relations between Georgia and Russia are improved, okay, there are high chances that a railroad, Tbilisi-Sochi, will restart operations.
That
And if
Abkhazia Railway.
Tbilisi-Sochi, absolutely, if Abkhazian railway starts operating again, this will be just a big bonanza to Armenia.
So over the last couple of days, there have been some very interesting statements
In
being made
Abkhazia.
by both sides. I think it was Bidzina Ivanishvili. Yeah, it was Ivanishvili
Yeah,
who
Bidzina is
basically said
Ivanishvili.
that Georgia would be ready to apologize to Abkhazia and South Ossetia for all the trouble they caused in 2008. Of course, the government in 2008 is the opposition in this election.
Yeah. We remember Saakashvili chewing his
That's
own
right.
necktie. Okay?
Meanwhile, I believe that the Russians have said that they're stopping social aid for Abkhazia as of essentially earlier this month, September 1st. So these are interesting developments do you think that it's beyond the realm of imagination that there could suddenly be a rapprochement between Georgia and Russia?
Why not? Georgia was knocking at European Union's door for 10 years. They were very upset when Moldova and Ukraine got the status of candidate country, and they were not. So this could be an impetus to turn their eyes to the north. Plus, I think they also understand that despite large investments from West into Georgian economy, Georgia's economic dependence on Russia is still immense. But again, it's a choice of Georgian people. But what I'm really looking for is opening up of Abkhazian Railway.
All right.
Okay. All right, let's leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Mr. Khachatryan, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
The pleasure's mine. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. We'll have you again soon.
Always at your service.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on September 18, 2024. We've been talking with Mr. Arthur Khachatryan, who is an MP from the Hayastan Dashinq Alliance in the Armenian parliament. He's also a member of the ARF Dashnaq party. In the past, he held government posts such as Deputy Minister of Territorial Administration and Development, Governor of Shirag, and Minister of Agriculture. For more information on our guests and participants in the show, check our show notes through podcast.groong.org/episode number. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.